How can a joke at work destroy a marriage and a life? What happens when the person you thought was weak quietly gathers evidence and turns the law against you? I didn't know the answer until the divorce papers arrived at my desk and my entire world fell apart. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The coffee machine in our office break room always made this awful grinding noise, like it was dying a slow death. I was standing there Monday morning, waiting for my third cup of the day, when Shane walked in with that easy smile that made half the women in accounting forget their own names. "Morning, Persis," he said, leaning against the counter with that casual confidence that my husband Elliot had never possessed. "How was your weekend?" I glanced around the break room. Tamsin was there, scrolling through her phone, and a couple other coworkers were chatting by the window. Perfect audience. "Oh, I said with a theatrical sigh, "same old boring routine." Elliot spent Saturday organizing his sock drawer by color and thread count. I swear, the man approaches everything with the same methodical precision. I paused for effect, letting my voice drop just loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I do mean everything." Tamsin looked up from her phone, eyebrow raised. "Yikes, that sounds thorough." Shane chuckled, and I felt that familiar flutter of attention. "Well, some of us prefer a more spontaneous approach," he said, his eyes meeting mine for just a moment longer than appropriate. "Oh, I bet you do," I replied, my voice carrying just enough suggestion to make it clear what I meant. "I imagine you're much more creative in your problem-solving techniques." The room went a little quiet. I could see Janet from HR shifting uncomfortably by the window, but Tamsin was grinning like she was watching her favorite reality show. "Persis," Tamsin said with a laugh, "you're terrible." "What? I'm just saying that some people know how to think outside the box," I said innocently. "Take initiative. Really, satisfy the requirements of a project." Shane's smile widened. "I do pride myself on user satisfaction." We were definitely not talking about IT support anymore, and everyone knew it. I felt powerful, witty, desired. This was the kind of attention I craved, the kind of electric interaction that made me feel alive in ways my marriage never had. That's when I heard the soft ding of the elevator doors opening down the hall. "Oh, speak of the devil," I said, not bothering to lower my voice. "That'll be my husband. He's bringing me lunch because he thinks I can't manage to feed myself." I rolled my eyes dramatically. He probably packed it in one of those little compartmentalized containers with a note about proper nutrition. Footsteps approached the break room, and I could see Elliot's familiar silhouette through the frosted glass door. 34 years old and already moving like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I should probably go act grateful," I said to the room, but my eyes stayed on Shane. Though honestly, after this morning's conversation, I'm wondering if I've been settling for the basic package when I could have premium service. Shane laughed outright at that, and even Tamsin looked a little shocked. Janet had gone completely pale. The break room door opened, and Elliot walked in, carrying a paper bag from the deli down the street. He looked tired, like he always did these days, his brown hair a little messy from running his hands through it. He worked too much, worried too much, felt too much. "Hey," he said quietly, offering me the bag. "I got you the turkey sandwich you like." "How thoughtful," I said, my voice still carrying that playful edge from my conversation with Shane. Though I was just telling everyone how predictable your delivery methods are. Elliot's face went very still. His eyes moved from me to Shane to the other faces in the room, and I could see him processing what he'd walked into. For a moment, I thought he might say something, might finally show some backbone and stand up for himself. Instead, he just nodded slowly. "I'll let you get back to your break," he said, his voice carefully neutral. As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Don't wait up tonight, honey. I might have to work late on some challenging projects. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Shane was still smiling. Tamsin was staring at me with something between admiration and horror, and Janet had quietly slipped out while I wasn't looking. "Girl," Tamsin said, shaking her head, "you are playing with fire." "Maybe," I said, feeling reckless and alive, "but at least fire is exciting." I didn't know it then, but Elliot hadn't actually left. Later, I would learn that he'd stopped just outside the break room door when he heard my voice, that he'd stood there and listened to every word. I would learn that my husband, the man I'd dismissed as weak and passive, had been quietly taking notes. But in that moment, all I felt was the thrill of Shane's attention and the satisfaction of finally saying what I'd been thinking for months. My marriage was boring, my husband was predictable, and I deserved better. I had no idea that Elliot was already 3 steps ahead of me. That evening, I came home to find Elliot in the kitchen, quietly making dinner while our 6-year-old daughter Lily colored at the table. The domestic scene felt suffocating after the excitement of the day. "How was work?" Elliot asked, without looking up from the stove. "Oh, you know," I said, dropping my purse on the counter. "Same old office drama. People need to learn to take a joke." He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "Right, a joke." Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. There was a tension in his shoulders I hadn't noticed before, a tightness around his eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I was already pulling out my phone to check for messages from Shane. "Fine," Elliot said, "just thinking about some things." Lily looked up from her coloring book. "Daddy seems sad," she said in that blunt way children have of cutting straight to the truth. "Daddy's just tired from work, sweetheart," I said automatically, still scrolling through my phone. Shane had sent me a funny meme about office equipment. I smiled despite myself. "Persis," Elliot said quietly. "We should talk later, after Lily goes to bed." "Sure," I said, not really listening. "Whatever you need to talk about." But when later came, I was on the phone with Tamsin, rehashing the day's events and laughing about Shane's flirtatious comments. By the time I got off the call, Elliot had already gone to bed. I found him the next morning at his laptop, typing quietly at the kitchen table before dawn. Financial spreadsheets filled the screen, and he was copying files to a flash drive. "What are you doing up so early?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. "Just organizing some paperwork," he said, not looking up. "Making sure everything's properly documented." "God, you're so anal about record keeping," I said with a laugh. "It's just household finances, not a federal audit." Elliot finally looked at me then, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. "You never know when you might need good records," he said simply. I shrugged and went to get ready for work, already thinking about what I might wear to catch Shane's attention. Behind me, I could hear the soft click of keys as Elliot continued his mysterious filing project. If I had paid attention, if I had looked more carefully at the screen, I might have seen that he wasn't organizing household finances at all. He was documenting everything: bank statements, joint accounts, credit card records, even screenshots of my social media posts. But I was too busy planning my next flirtatious encounter to notice that my husband was quietly building a case. The kitchen felt smaller than usual that Tuesday evening, like the walls were pressing in on us. Elliot moved around the space with his usual quiet efficiency, preparing dinner while I sat at the counter scrolling through work emails. Well, mostly work emails. Shane had sent me a few messages throughout the day that had nothing to do with IT support and everything to do with the tension we'd been building between us. "Your sister called," Elliot said without looking up from the cutting board. "Marla wants to come over for dinner this weekend." I groaned internally. Marla had always been protective of her little brother, and she had a way of seeing through people that made me uncomfortable. "Do we have to? You know how she gets." "How does she get?" Elliot asked, his knife moving in precise, measured strokes through the vegetables. "Judgmental, critical. She acts like she's still looking out for her baby brother, instead of recognizing that you're a grown man who can make his own decisions. Elliot paused in his chopping. Maybe she just cares about my happiness. And what's that supposed to mean? He shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. Nothing. Just that it's nice to have someone in your corner. The implication hung in the air between us. I felt a flare of irritation. I'm in your corner, Elliot. We're married. We're supposed to be a team. Are we? The question was so quiet I almost missed it. What kind of question is that? Finally, he looked at me. His brown eyes were tired, but there was something else there too. Something I hadn't seen before. I heard some interesting things at work today. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Oh? Like what? Apparently, some people think my wife finds me inadequate. The word hung between us like a challenge. I could feel my face heating up, but I wasn't sure if it was from embarrassment or anger. Elliot, if this is about yesterday in the break room, you're completely overreacting. It was just office banter. Everyone jokes about their spouses. Do they? He set down the knife and turned to face me fully. Do they really joke about their sex lives with coworkers? Do they tell rooms full of people that their husband is boring in bed? I never said that. You said I approach everything with methodical precision. You said I was predictable. You implied that Shane would be more creative. His voice remained calm, but I could see the hurt underneath. What exactly am I supposed to think about that? I felt cornered, and when I felt cornered, I came out fighting. I think you're being oversensitive. God, Elliot, I can't even make a joke without you analyzing it to death. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You take everything so seriously. This is my marriage, Persis. I take that seriously. Well, maybe that's the problem, I snapped. Maybe if you loosened up a little, if you showed some spontaneity, some passion, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere for excitement. The words were out before I could stop them. Elliot went very still, and I realized I'd just confirmed his worst fears. Look elsewhere, he repeated quietly. I didn't mean... I started, but he held up a hand. No, you meant exactly what you said. He turned back to the stove, his movements careful and controlled. Thank you for being honest. The rest of dinner passed in tense silence. Lily chatted about her day at school, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents between her parents, but I caught her looking back and forth between us with those perceptive 6-year-old eyes that missed nothing. After we put her to bed, I found Elliot in his study, working on his laptop again. More spreadsheets, more file organization. What are you working on? I asked from the doorway. Just making sure I understand our financial situation, he said without looking up. Reviewing our assets, our debts, our joint accounts, making sure I have a clear picture of everything. Why? He finally looked at me then, and his expression was unreadable. Because I think it's important to know where you stand. I felt a chill run down my spine, though I couldn't say exactly why. Elliot, you're scaring me a little. All this talk about finances and assets. What's going on? I'm just being thorough, Persis. You know how I am. Methodical, predictable, boring. The words carried a bitter edge I'd never heard from him before. Look, about what I said earlier. You were right, he said, cutting me off. I am too serious. I do take things too much to heart, but you know what? Some things deserve to be taken seriously. He closed the laptop and stood up. I'm going to bed. Don't wait up. I know you have important work to catch up on. As he walked past me toward the bedroom, I caught his arm. Elliot, wait. We should talk about this. He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back at my face. I think you've said enough for one day. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Elliot slept beside me. Or pretended to sleep. I could tell from his breathing that he was awake too. The space between us and the bed felt like an ocean. I thought about Shane, about the way he looked at me, about the excitement I felt when we flirted. I thought about my marriage, about the comfortable routine that had somehow become a prison. I thought about what I wanted, what I deserved, what I was willing to do to get it. What I didn't think about was the man lying next to me, the father of my child, the person who had loved me faithfully for 8 years. I didn't think about what my words had done to him, or what he might be planning while I was busy planning my own escape. I should have been paying attention to the way he'd been documenting everything, the careful questions he'd been asking about my schedule, the quiet phone calls he'd been making when he thought I wasn't listening. But I was too caught up in my own drama to notice that Elliot had stopped being the passive, predictable husband I'd been taking for granted. He was becoming something else entirely, something much more dangerous. The next morning, I woke up to find his side of the bed empty and cold. Downstairs, Lily was eating cereal at the kitchen table, but there was no sign of Elliot. "Where's Daddy?" I asked. "He left early," Lily said around a mouthful of cereal. "He said he had important meetings today." I frowned. Elliot was an accountant at a mid-sized firm. He rarely had meetings that required him to leave before 7 in the morning. "Did he say when he'd be back?" Lily shrugged. "He said not to wait for him for dinner. He might be very late." As I got ready for work, I tried calling Elliot's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that he was probably just busy with some client emergency. But as I drove to the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage. The quiet, predictable man I'd been married to for 8 years was changing, and I had no idea what he was becoming. I was about to find out. Friday night at Marcello's Bistro, I felt like I was finally in my element. The restaurant buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses, and our table was perfectly positioned where everyone could see us. Tamsin had organized the dinner, a mix of people from work and a few other friends, and I'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing a dress that Shane would notice. He was sitting across from me, looking relaxed in a way that Elliot never did. My husband sat beside me, quiet as usual, nursing a single beer while everyone else was on their second or third drinks. The contrast between them was stark, and I found myself playing it up. "Oh my God, you guys," I said, gesturing with my wine glass. "You should have seen Elliot this morning. He color-coded our weekend schedule. Color-coded. Like we're running a small corporation instead of just living our lives." Tamsin laughed, but I noticed a few people at the table exchanging glances. Shane smiled, but it seemed forced. "Organization isn't a bad thing," said Jennifer from accounting, her voice careful. "No, but there's organization and then there's obsession," I continued, emboldened by the wine and the attention. "I mean, who needs a spreadsheet to plan a grocery trip?" Elliot said nothing, just took another sip of his beer. His silence only made me feel more reckless. "At least some people know how to be spontaneous," I said, letting my eyes drift to Shane. "Some people understand that life is supposed to be exciting, unpredictable, fun." "Persis," Elliot said quietly. "Maybe we should..." "Should what? Should pretend that everything is perfect?" I laughed, but it came out sharper than I intended. Should I pretend that I don't sometimes wonder what it would be like to be with someone who actually knows how to have a good time? The table went dead silent. I could feel everyone staring, but the wine had made me bold, reckless. I was tired of pretending, tired of being the dutiful wife to a man who bored me to tears. "Someone who knows how to really satisfy a woman," I added, my eyes locked on Shane's. "Someone who understands that passion isn't supposed to be scheduled between laundry and lawn care." Shane's face had gone pale. He was staring down at his plate like he wanted to disappear into it. Around the table, our friends were looking anywhere but at us. "Persis, stop," Elliot said, his voice still quiet, but carrying a warning I'd never heard before. "Stop what? Stop telling the truth?" I turned to face him, and the hurt in his eyes only made me angrier. "Stop admitting that our marriage is a joke, that I'm dying of boredom, that I've been thinking about what it would be like to be with someone who actually wants me." "You're drunk," Elliot said. "I'm honest," I shot back. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest. Tamsin was staring at me with wide eyes. "Persis, maybe you should..." "Should what?" Should go back to pretending that I'm happy being married to someone who treats sex like a quarterly business review. Should pretend that I don't fantasize about men who actually know how to make a woman feel alive. I was dimly aware that other tables were starting to stare, that our server was hovering uncertainly nearby. But I couldn't stop. All the frustration and resentment I'd been building up was pouring out of me like poison. "You want to know the truth?" I said, my voice getting louder. "The truth is that I've been having more fun flirting with Shane for 2 weeks than I've had in my entire marriage. The truth is that I think about him when I'm lying next to my husband at night. The truth is that if he asked me to leave with him right now, I probably would." Shane stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air," he mumbled, and walked quickly toward the exit without looking back. The silence that followed was deafening. Elliot sat perfectly still beside me, his hands folded on the table, his face expressionless. Around us, our friends were staring with a mixture of shock and embarrassment. "Well," Tamsin said finally, her voice artificially bright. "This got awkward fast." "I think we should go," Jennifer said quietly to her husband. "No, don't leave on my account," I said, suddenly feeling defensive. "I'm just saying what everyone thinks but is too polite to admit. How many of you are really happy in your marriages? How many of you have never wondered what you're missing?" But people were already reaching for their purses, signaling for the check, making polite excuses about babysitters and early mornings. Within 10 minutes, our table had cleared except for Tamsin, Elliot, and me. "Jesus, Persis," Tamsin said, shaking her head. "What the hell was that?" "That was me finally being honest," I said, but the wine was wearing off, and I was starting to feel sick. Elliot stood up and pulled out his wallet. He left enough cash on the table to cover our entire bill, including tip, then looked down at me. "When you're ready to come home," he said quietly, "I'll be there, but this conversation isn't over." He walked away without another word, leaving me sitting there with Tamsin, who was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Persis, what the hell are you doing?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, and for the first time all evening, I was telling the complete truth. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a growing sense of dread. The events of the previous night came back to me in horrible, vivid detail. I'd humiliated my husband in front of our friends. I'd basically confessed to an affair that hadn't even happened yet. I'd destroyed what was left of my reputation in one drunken rant. Elliot was already gone when I came downstairs. Lily was at his mother Ruth's house for the weekend, as planned, but the house felt eerily quiet. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, but got no response. By afternoon, I was starting to panic. That's when Tamsin called. "Girl, we need to talk," she said without preamble. I know, last night was a disaster," she cut me off, "but that's not why I'm calling. Have you checked your social media today?" My stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because Jennifer posted about dinner. She didn't mention names, but she talked about witnessing someone have a complete meltdown and humiliate their spouse in public. It's getting a lot of comments." I hung up and immediately checked Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Jennifer's post was vague but clearly about our dinner. People were commenting, speculating, sharing. Someone had tagged me in a response. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Greta here. Heard about last night. Call me." Then another from Elliot's sister Marla. "We need to talk, soon." And finally, one from a number I didn't recognize. "This is HR at your company. Please come in Monday morning to discuss a workplace conduct issue." I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, watching my life fall apart in real time. The worst part was that I could see exactly how I'd gotten here, could trace the line from that first flirtatious comment in the break room to this moment of complete social destruction. But I still didn't understand what Elliot was planning. I still thought he was the same passive, predictable man I'd been taking for granted. I had no idea that while I was panicking about social media posts and HR meetings, my husband was sitting in a lawyer's office, calmly presenting months of documented evidence and discussing custody arrangements. The reckoning was coming, and I was completely unprepared for it. Monday morning arrived like a death sentence. I'd spent the weekend trying to reach Elliot, calling his mother's house where Lily was staying, even driving by his office. Nothing. He'd vanished as completely as if he'd never existed, taking our daughter with him. The HR office at my company had always felt sterile, but sitting across from Patricia Williams, our head of human resources, it felt like a courtroom. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that made you want to confess things you hadn't even done. "Thank you for coming in, Persis," she said, opening a thick folder on her desk. "I think you know why we need to talk. If this is about Friday night, that was a private dinner. What I do on my own time." "This isn't about Friday night," Patricia interrupted. "Well, not entirely. We've received several complaints about inappropriate workplace conduct over the past few weeks." My mouth went dry. "What kind of complaints?" She pulled out a sheet of paper and began reading. "Making sexually suggestive comments about a coworker, creating an uncomfortable work environment through inappropriate discussions of personal relationships, using company time and resources for personal communications of a sexual nature." "That's ridiculous. I've never—" "We have documentation, Persis." She turned her computer monitor toward me. On the screen was a series of email exchanges between Shane and me, messages that had started professional and gradually become more personal, more flirtatious. Messages I'd thought were private. "How did you get these?" "I'd flagged them during a routine security audit. All company communications are subject to monitoring, as you know from your employee handbook." I stared at the screen, watching my own words condemn me. Messages about working late together, about hands-on training, about how much I enjoyed our private consultations. Out of context, they looked exactly like what they were, the digital footprint of an affair. "Shane Dobell has requested a transfer to our Denver office," Patricia continued. "He cited an uncomfortable work environment and unwanted attention from a colleague. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow." Unwanted attention? He was flirting back. He initiated half of these conversations. "Mr. Dobell's messages are professional throughout. Yours," she gestured at the screen, "are not." I scrolled through the exchanges, seeing them now through Patricia's eyes. Shane's responses were careful, neutral, while mine were increasingly bold, suggestive, inappropriate. He'd been covering himself while letting me hang myself with my own words. "We also have witness statements about your behavior in the break room, your comments about your marriage, and your general conduct around Mr. Dobell." "Witness statements from who?" "I can't reveal that, but I can tell you that multiple employees have expressed concern about your behavior." I thought about Janet from HR, who'd been in the break room that first day, about the other coworkers who'd witnessed my increasingly desperate attempts to get Shane's attention, about how I'd mistaken their uncomfortable silence for approval. "What does this mean for my job?" Patricia closed the folder. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Your access to company systems has been suspended, and you're not to contact Mr. Dobell or any other employees about this matter." "You can't be serious. I've worked here for 5 years. My performance reviews have always been excellent." "Your work performance isn't in question, Persis. Your professional conduct is." I left the office in a daze, my keycard deactivated, my career hanging by a thread. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and tried to call Elliot again, still straight to voicemail. That's when I decided to check our bank accounts. The first one I tried gave me an error message. "Access denied. Contact your financial institution." The second one did the same. With growing panic, I called our bank. After 20 minutes on hold and multiple transfers, I finally reached someone who could help. "Mrs. Vane, I show that your husband has filed paperwork to freeze all joint accounts pending legal proceedings." "What legal proceedings?" "I'm not privy to those details, ma'am. You'll need to speak with your attorney." I don't have an attorney. Then I'd suggest getting one. I drove home in a state of shock. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? A week ago, I'd been a successful office administrator with a stable marriage and a comfortable life. Now I was unemployed, broke, and apparently headed for divorce. At home, I found a note on the kitchen counter in Elliot's careful handwriting. Persis, I've taken Lily to stay with my mother while we figure things out. Don't try to contact us directly. All communication should go through legal channels from now on. I've documented everything, including the financial records, the messages, and the witness statements. I suggest you get a lawyer. Elliot. I read the note 3 times before the full implications hit me. Elliot hadn't just left me. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. While I'd been playing games with Shane, my husband had been quietly building a case against me. The house felt enormous and empty without Lily's chatter and Elliot's quiet presence. I wandered from room to room, looking for signs of what he'd taken, what he'd left behind. His clothes were gone from our bedroom. His laptop, his files, his personal items, all gone. But he'd left something behind. On his desk in the study, I found a manila folder with my name on it. Inside were photocopies of everything. Bank statements showing my spending on new clothes and dinners out, credit card receipts from restaurants where I'd met Shane, even printouts of my social media posts from the past few months. At the bottom of the folder was a business card for a divorce attorney and a handwritten note. You might want to call her. You're going to need help. I stared at the card, finally understanding the scope of what Elliot had been doing while I'd been focused on my office romance. He hadn't just been organizing files. He'd been preparing for war, and I was completely unarmed. That evening, my mother called. Persis, honey, I just heard from Ruth. She says Elliot has Lily and that you two are separating. What's going on? I tried to explain, but how do you tell your mother that you've destroyed your marriage for a man who'd thrown you under the bus at the first sign of trouble? Oh, sweetheart, she said when I finished. Men can be so unforgiving about these things. I'm sure if you just apologize and promise to do better. Mum, he's frozen our bank accounts. He's documented everything. This isn't about forgiveness anymore. Well, then you fight back, she said firmly. You don't let him steamroll you. You get a good lawyer, and you make sure you get what you deserve. But as I hung up the phone, I wondered what exactly I deserved. I'd betrayed my husband's trust, humiliated him publicly, and prioritized my own desires over my family's stability. Maybe what I deserved was exactly what I was getting. The next morning, I called the attorney whose card Elliot had left me. Sandra Mitchell's office, a crisp voice answered. Hi, my husband left me this card. I think I need a divorce lawyer. Can you come in this afternoon? Miss Mitchell has had a cancellation. Yes, I said, though I had no idea how I was going to pay for it. I'll be there. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was really happening. My marriage was over, my job was in jeopardy, and I was about to enter a legal battle with a man who'd spent months preparing while I'd been busy destroying my own life. The worst part was that I still didn't understand how completely outmaneuvered I was. I still thought this was about hurt feelings and wounded pride. I had no idea that Elliot had been 3 steps ahead of me all along, and that the real reckoning was still to come. Ruth Vane's living room had always intimidated me. Everything was precisely arranged. The throw pillows perfectly fluffed, the coffee table books arranged by height, the family photos positioned at exact angles. It was like Elliot's personality made manifest in home decor. And sitting there on Wednesday afternoon, I felt like an intruder in a museum. Elliot sat across from me in his father's old recliner, looking more composed than I'd seen him in months. His sister Marla was positioned on the couch like a bodyguard, her arms crossed and her expression hostile. Ruth stood by the fireplace, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, watching me with the kind of disapproval usually reserved for people who talked during movies. Thank you for agreeing to meet, I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. I think we can work this out without involving lawyers. Can we? Elliot's voice was calm, measured. Because from where I'm sitting, you've already involved half the city in our marriage problems. That's not fair. Friday night was a mistake. I was drunk. Friday night was just the culmination, Marla interrupted. We know about the months of flirting, the inappropriate messages, the way you've been humiliating my brother in front of your coworkers. I turned to Elliot. You showed them the emails? I showed them everything, Persis. The financial records, the messages, the witness statements. I wanted them to understand what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with? I made some mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can... Fix this? Ruth's voice cut through the room like a blade. You think you can fix what you've done to this family? To my granddaughter? Lily doesn't know anything about this. Lily knows her mother has been acting strange for months, Ruth said. She knows her parents have been fighting. She knows something is wrong, even if she doesn't understand what. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. In all my focus on Shane, on my own unhappiness, I'd barely thought about how my behavior was affecting our daughter. I never meant for Lily to be hurt by this. But she is hurt, Elliot said quietly. She's confused and scared, and she doesn't understand why Mommy seems angry all the time and why Daddy seems sad. I can fix that. I can be better. How? The question came from Marla, sharp and challenging. How exactly are you going to fix the fact that you've been emotionally cheating on your husband for months? How are you going to fix the fact that you humiliated him in front of your friends? How are you going to fix the fact that you've been lying and manipulating and gaslighting him every time he tried to talk to you about it? I wasn't gaslighting anyone, I protested. I was just trying to... You told him he was imagining things, Elliot said. You told him he was being oversensitive. You made him question his own perceptions when he knew something was wrong. What would you call that? I felt cornered, desperate. Elliot, you know me. You know I'm not a bad person. I got confused. I felt trapped, and I made some stupid choices. But we can work through this. Can we? He leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine directly for the first time since I'd arrived. Can you honestly tell me that if Shane called you right now and asked you to meet him, you wouldn't go? The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to say yes, wanted to promise that my affair was over, that I was committed to fixing our marriage. But something in Elliot's expression told me he already knew the answer. It's not about Shane, I said finally. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, this whole thing has been about Shane, about your need for attention, for excitement, for something I apparently can't give you. You could give it to me if you tried. If you showed some passion, some spontaneity. So this is my fault? His voice remained calm, but I could see the anger underneath. I'm responsible for your choices because I'm not exciting enough. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. At dinner, in front of our friends, you said I was boring. You said you fantasized about other men. You said you would leave with Shane if he asked. I was drunk. Drunk words, sober thoughts, Ruth said coldly. I turned to face her, feeling my own anger rising. You've never liked me, Ruth. You've been waiting for something like this so you could turn your son against me. I didn't need to turn him against you, she replied. You did that all by yourself. This is ridiculous, I said, standing up. You're all acting like I committed some unforgivable sin. People have affairs. Marriages have problems. It doesn't mean everything has to be destroyed. Sit down, Persis. Elliot's voice carried authority I'd never heard before. Don't tell me what to do. You don't get to control me anymore. Control you? He stood up as well, and for the first time in our entire marriage, he looked genuinely angry. When have I ever tried to control you? When have I ever told you what to wear, where to go, who to see? When have I ever done anything but support you and love you and try to make you happy? You controlled me with your expectations, with your need for everything to be perfect and organized and predictable. I tried to build a stable life for our family. I tried to be a good husband and father. If that felt like control to you, maybe the problem isn't with me." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Ruth's antique clock. I could feel all three of them staring at me, and suddenly I felt like I was the one on trial. "I want to see my daughter," I said finally. "You will," Elliot said. "We'll work out a custody arrangement." "I don't want a custody arrangement. I want my family back." "That's not going to happen, Persis." The finality in his voice hit me like a slap. "You can't just decide that. Marriage is supposed to be for better or worse." "And I honored that," he said. "Through your complaints about our boring life, through your increasing distance, through your obvious attraction to your coworker. I tried to talk to you, tried to understand what was wrong, tried to fix whatever was broken between us. But you weren't interested in fixing anything. You were interested in replacing me. That's not true, isn't it? Because everything you've said and done for the past few months suggests that you've already checked out of this marriage. You just haven't had the courage to admit it." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Ruth went to answer it, and I heard her talking quietly to someone at the door. "Elliot," she called, "there's someone here for Persis." A moment later, a young man in a suit walked into the living room carrying a thick manila envelope. "Persis Vane?" he asked. "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed me the envelope and left without another word. I stared at it, my hands shaking. "Go ahead," Elliot said quietly. "Open it." Inside were legal documents, divorce papers, custody petitions, financial disclosures. Page after page of legal language that boiled down to one simple fact. My marriage was over, and Elliot had the documentation to prove that it was entirely my fault. At the bottom of the stack was a summary of evidence: copies of my emails with Shane, records of my credit card purchases, witness statements from coworkers, even screenshots of my social media posts about being unhappy in my marriage. "How long have you been planning this?" I whispered. "Since the day I overheard you in the break room," Elliot said. "I knew then that something had fundamentally changed, and I needed to protect myself and Lily." "Protect yourself from what? I never threatened you." "You threatened our family every time you chose Shane over me. Every time you lied about where you were going or who you were with. Every time you made me feel like I was crazy for noticing that my wife was falling in love with someone else." The words hit me like physical blows. I wasn't falling in love with him. "What would you call it?" I couldn't answer, because the truth was too ugly to say out loud. I had been falling in love with Shane, or at least with the idea of him, with the excitement he represented, the escape from my ordinary life. "I want you to know," Elliot said, his voice gentle now, "that I did love you. I loved you enough to try to save our marriage even when I knew it was probably over. But I also love Lily enough to make sure she has at least one stable parent. I'm stable, I'm her mother. You're unemployed, you've been having an affair, and you just spent 10 minutes trying to convince us that your choices are everyone else's fault. That's not stable, Persis. That's someone who needs help." I looked around the room at the three people who had once been my family, and I realized that I was completely alone. They had made their decision, formed their alliance, and I was on the outside looking in. "I should go," I said finally. "Probably," Ruth agreed. As I walked to the door, Elliot called after me. "Persis, I hope you get the help you need. I really do. But this marriage is over." I drove home in tears, legal papers scattered on the passenger seat like pieces of my old life, finally understanding there was no going back and no happy ending. At Sandra Mitchell's small, tired law office, she laid it out bluntly. Elliot had proof of my emotional affair, my reckless spending, my lost job, and my unstable behavior. I wouldn't lose my daughter completely, but I'd see Lily only every other weekend at first, maybe more once I proved I was stable and started therapy. The house would be sold, the equity split, my life reset, whether I liked it or not. Therapy with Dr. Chen forced me to admit I'd left my marriage emotionally long before the emails, chasing excitement and fantasy instead of appreciating the boring safety I'd had. 2 weeks later, I signed the divorce papers. Elliot told me he didn't hate me, just couldn't stay. 6 months on, I work as a receptionist, live in a small apartment, and see Lily regularly. Her dad is dating a kind woman. Shane is engaged to someone else. My life is smaller, quieter, and nothing like I imagined, but it's honest, and for the first time, I'm trying to become someone worthy of my daughter's love again.